Is Qiuyuan too niche? I don't think so. Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, with Qiuyuan coming up in 2.7, there can be the debate surrounding whether he's too niche or not. Is he too niche? Is he being designed for one or two specific characters too much? And is he really worth the pull if he is so niche? Well, I think that he's not really too niche, and this can be a pretty common misconception here. I think it's understandable to look at him, see that he's mostly based around echo skill damage buffing, and then think, okay, yeah, that's way too specific. However, I would argue that we don't really need to apply negative status logic to anything that isn't negative statuses, because generally speaking, everything else has turned out to be more flexible. Yes, negative statuses in particular are notorious for how they really want you to have a specific support in order to have the specific DPS reach their max potential. We have seen it both times. Zani really wants Phoebe, and Cardathea really wants Shakona. We know how this goes at this stage. However, I wouldn't really say that the whole echo skill damage thing is anywhere near as restrictive. Consider that we already have a DPS in the game right now that operates off of that stuff, being Frolova, and she works just fine if you have Donjin as a second slot teammate. Yes, she absolutely prefers Counterella, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need her. You can still use Donjin and clear just fine. It's not really going to feel that bad. But then again, that's more so the DPS being flexible. What about Qiuyuan himself? After all, it's pretty reasonable to think that Qiuyuan is a little niche considering his situation, and unless he can pull some kind of Yuno situation or brand situation where his damage is high enough for him to simply just have a lot of inherent value anyway, the majority of his value is likely going to lie in his buffs then. At least, that is what I believe. And in that situation, can you really consider him a justifiable pull? Well, for starters, I don't think he's too niche simply because I think it's just a perspective thing. He looks niche, but whenever you really pick it apart, he isn't actually all that niche. Because every second slot teammate tends to be like that. We've simply been spoiled by how flexible Yuno and Brandt ended up being, and we definitely do have some second slot teammates that are definitely more flexible than others. I won't deny that. In fact, we even have freaking Chang Li, a character who is designed to work with multiple different other characters. So, to be honest, I could definitely understand where you'd be coming from. However, the thing is, he isn't really all that different in design to somebody like Juja. She also only really works with two DPSs, being Carlotta and Jinshi. I mean, if you want to include Lingyang, then sure, that's 3, but are we really inviting Lingyang to the function? I don't think so. So whenever you consider that, suddenly his design as a character starts to seem a whole lot more reasonable. Yes, he is basically only going to be able to work with two different DPSs whenever he releases, those being Galbrena and Frolova, but those are pretty good teammates to work with if you ask me. For instance, I used to consider Jojo's value to be incredibly high because there was once a time where both Carlotta and Jinshi were the best DPSs in the game back in 2.0. For some time, they were both extremely strong and coexisted in the meta together. Jinshi had also been the best DPS in the game for months up until that point. So, whenever you consider that, I thought that Jojo was an extremely valuable pull back then, and even now, I still think she's a very good pull if you're a Carlotta main, because she gives her access to your best hypercarry teams. So for those reasons, she was very strong. Basically, the amount of value that a second slot teammate has in this type of situation completely depends on how good their respective DPSs are. Because Carlotta is still a really strong Glacio DPS, Juja is always going to be relevant. She's definitely more of a niche side, and there's not really much reason to pick her up if you're not going to be playing Carlotta. Of course, there is Jinshi teams, but Jinshi generally has a ton of different second slot teammate options these days. But you get the idea. There is more than enough reason to invest into Juja if you have the specific tools that she needs in order to shine. You can basically apply the same level of logic to Qiuyuan's case. He's going to be working with Galbrena and Frolova. In those two cases, I believe that he's going to absolutely excel. Now, in Galbrena's case, you do have alternative teams that you can use, and you don't really have to use Qiuyuan. If you have other Fusion 5 stars, then you're able to form other team comps, and you may end up feeling like a redundant pull then. But if you're somebody that has Galbrena and Frolova on an account, he ends up being an absolute boon value-wise. He is really, really worth it then, because not only is he best installed for two teammates on your account, but he's able to boost up your Frolova to the next level. And that's another major thing that I've covered extensively in my videos at this point. I believe that Qiuyuan honestly has some really good meta potential, because he has the potential to be really good with Ferlova, and potentially replace Roshia in the Triple Havoc team, because Roshia doesn't really do all that much in that team, aside from increasing Counterella's own damage. And while it is indeed a seamless team, there is just no reason to put the limited pull investment into Roshia if you haven't got her already. But let's say that you have both Galbraina and Ferlova, and you also have Roshia, then you're able to free up Qiuyuan for your Galbraina. Either way, your investments end up working out in the end. However, if you opt to use Qiuyuan with Ferlova, you could easily be looking at the best DPS in the game. We're obviously going to have to actually wait for his release and testing and all that to see whether that's the case or not. However, if that does end up being the case, then Ferlova's value is genuinely going to shoot through the roof. I obviously already believe that he's going to be very strong for her, but depending on how strong, we could be looking at something extremely impressive from him. So whenever you consider that, sure, he is definitely niche. I am not necessarily trying to refute the point that he is niche, because that literally just wouldn't be fair, because yeah, he is niche, but that's not really a basis to evaluate his value on. He is not too niche, is the point that I'm getting at. Because sure, his kit from a glance might not seem that good, his value from a glance might not seem that good, and he may not really seem like a character that's worth investing into. However, whenever you look a bit deeper and you realize where his nicheness lies and the type of characters that he's supporting, he actually ends up working out to have really good value. Now, do I think that this is a character that's going to sell crazy, everybody's going to be pulling for him? No, I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think that it's likely just going to be the same as Juja. A set number of people that main the certain characters that that person supports are going to get that particular character, and everybody else is basically just going to forget they exist. That is generally how the cookie crumbles. The nice thing is that both of the options that you have for Qiuyuan are very strong ones. So this easily makes him a really good investment. If you consider Juja to be a good valuable unit, and you think that she's well designed in terms of meta value, then I think that Qiuyuan is basically going to result in the same type of fate. Now, how long is Qiuyuan going to last? It completely depends on two things. A, is he going to get replaced in either of the teams that he works in anytime soon? And B, how long are the DPSs that he's dependent on value-wise going to stay good for? I have no doubt in my mind that Ferlova's going to stay good for a very long time. The thing is that even if she ever falls off on TOA, it is basically impossible for them to get rid of her in Whimpering Wastes, because she is just so ahead of the curve. The only way that they could really do that is if they introduce major Havoc counters into wuwa, and they literally run Havoc counter every single cycle. But even now, Havoc counter just isn't really doing much to counter Ferlova. She is just absolutely inherently broken at that game mode, and I think Kuro didn't really realize their mistake until it was too late. So now we just have a unit that is absolutely busted there, and it is going to take years of damage creep for us to eventually catch up to Ferlova and wuwa. She is just that good there. I think that the approach that Kuro is going to take is that opposed to nerfing Ferlova and Whimpering Wastes, they're just going to try and heavily incentivize playing other types of teams, because there is literally nothing else that they can realistically do about this. She is just that broken there. So I think that Ferlova is basically always going to have value, at least as a Whimpering Wastes character. And if not there, she is still an extremely strong TOA DPS at the minute, and Qiuyuan is only going to be supplementing that. So I think that she's definitely going to stay good going into the foreseeable future. As for Galbraina, we're going to have to wait and see in regards to how her value is going to pan out. I don't actually know what to expect from her, we have to still wait for her to come out. I can definitely trust Ferlova's timelessness. We will have to wait and see for Galbraina. She very much will be strong, she is a 2.x DPS, those are always strong, I have no doubt in my mind about that. But as for how she's going to develop in the meta in the future, that's what we're going to have to wait and see. However, I have no doubt in my mind that she's going to last for at least 6 to 8 months or so, because generally DPSs in this game have a very long shelf life in terms of relevancy. And because of that, Qiuyuan's value is always going to remain at least somewhat relevant, because for as long as Galbraina is a good DPS, Qiuyuan is going to be a good support, because he is going to end up being her best in slot. Now, in terms of whether he's going to get replaced anytime soon, I actually don't really think they're going to replace him in the Ferlova team, and that's because it's very simple. Roshi is the one that's being kicked out of that team. We already had a full premium cost team for Ferlova, but because we're just getting rid of Roshia there now, I don't really see them replacing him so soon. Now they could, because he's ultimately being designed as a Galbraina teammate, and they might not really want him being shared with Ferlova, in which case, who knows, they're going to make another third slot that's going to be better for Ferlova. However, I would personally doubt that. I wouldn't necessarily put it past Kuro Games, but here's the thing, even if they do that and they do end up making a new niche Ferlova third slot teammate, you need to consider this. if you have both Galbrina and Frolova, that doesn't suddenly mean that Qiuyuan was a bad pull for you. You still got a unit that's really good for 2 different characters and is going to push one of them to the next level. So honestly, is he niche? Yes, there is absolutely no argument about that. He is being made for a specific niche, but basically every Wuthering Wave 2nd Assault teammate is. All around, I think he is a very strong character and he is definitely going to thrive going into the future. I can see a bright future for him, honestly. We'll see if they end up making more Echo skill damage DPSs, because if they do, well, then we might actually be looking at something quite interesting here. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why Qiuyuan isn't too niche. This has been Juice, signing out, and no matter how niche he is, I am still intending to max him out.